Right now, we are headed into a few of the neighborhoods in DC where we've heard sex is being sold.
We've talked to a lot of people in the sex trade who say this is one of the areas police have pushed them to. This is how many buyers see the sex trade.
So the girl just went up to the car that was honking at her. You can only assume he's either a John or a pimp.
But what you could never know from this view is what led someone to the street corner. Maybe they're here by choice, but if it was force, fraud, or coercion, the federal government considers it trafficking. And if they're a minor, it is always trafficking. Thousands of people across the US are being trafficked for sex, many of them children.
What I really want to know, though, is how is this happening and what can we do about it?
When government agencies identify a child who has been trafficked for sex, there are a few things that have to happen. One of the first steps is often an interview with the victim in a room like this. On the other side of the glass, there are detectives, lawyers, child welfare, and case coordinators like Beth Bouchard.
How do kids end up in these situations?
When most people hear about human trafficking, they think that this is a problem that happens in other places, in other countries, and they have sort of that image of maybe a woman in chains, maybe somebody tied to a radiator. They might think sometimes the images in media will be portrayed as all white, so maybe the victims are all white females. And in reality, we see that kids, well, certainly some of our kids are held physically against their will. The majority of the kids that we see have sort of these invisible trauma bonds with their exploiter. And particularly for our commercial sexual exploitation cases, the dynamics of that abuse are very complicated, and they almost mirror domestic violence. I think we had a case a couple years ago with a youth who was recovered in a hotel in a sting with law enforcement, and she'd been exploited for multiple months. And she had talked about how her exploiter, she almost saw him as someone helping her and saving her, even though he was facilitating her sexual abuse every night. So you can see how, for especially a child, a youth in that situation, it can be very confusing.
Of the cases of exploitation that Beth and her colleagues work on, about 2/3 are kids of color, and more than 3 in 4 have a history of child abuse.
Can you describe to me the bridge of being a victim of abuse to becoming a person who is exploited?
We see that kids who have been sexually abused are targeted by perpetrators looking to exploit them. So that might mean that we have a youth who's been sexually abused and she encounters an exploiter who grooms her, and he might say something to her like, you were giving it away for free before, and you were having sex with people you didn't want to have sex with, but now I'm going to help you make money off of that.
But how would they know?
And they might not know. These youth have been traumatized before. All youth are looking for love and acceptance and a connection with somebody.
Young people who don't have a stable home life are vulnerable to trafficking. Homeless and runaway youth are especially at risk. And so are kids who are in the child welfare system or foster care. Ashley Sacho became a foster kid after her mother died when she was 9. She was trafficked while she was in government care.
What were the ages that this was happening to you?
About 11, 12, around that age. I know I stopped at 16.
Do you remember the first time you were introduced to, kind of explicitly to the concept of selling sex?
I remember it was the neighbor, Ashley, and doing that, I really don't like to.
You don't
during
have to
that time, it was difficult, and it was just she would always be like, well, closed legs don't get fed, closed legs don't be fed. I never knew nothing about human trafficking. I never knew that I was being exploited. I didn't wake up and be like, oh, this is what's happening to me. It's something that I thought was normal. It was something that went on in my family. It was something that it was just like what it was. It's not until you realize like, oh, okay, other people don't live like this. And literally, it's not until you out of that box, because if you grew up in foster care and you grew up around certain things, this is not a nightmare. This is your life.
So can you tell me a little bit about your experience just kind of dealing with the government care system?
I think the government care system is broken. And I think that there's a lot of situations where it's like we as, you know, children that's in the foster care system, we don't know where we're supposed to be either. It's like literally you don't know what home, you don't know where you're supposed to be. You know, okay, I was here last, but then when I went back there, she told me she don't have me no more. So it's like, okay, do I go to the social worker and turn myself in? Because if you run away from your foster home or you run away from anything, you are considered a runaway youth, which you can get arrested for.
Right.
And my social worker switched so many times, so no one knew who case it belonged to.
Do you know how many times it switched?
Probably like 5 to 6 times, I don't know. Because every time I thought that a certain lady was my social worker, and they was like, no, this person your social worker, no, this person your social worker, no, this person, because it's just too many cases.
Do you feel like kids in the system are easier targets for people who are trying to exploit them?
Yeah. I think any kid is an easy target that don't know how to love themselves or wasn't provided with love and care.
The entire point of foster care is that it's supposed to take care of children who need help. But right now, the system is failing a lot of kids. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, 88% of their cases of likely child sex trafficking involved a child who was in the care of social services when they went missing. And other professions that are supposed to help are also failing victims of trafficking.
Come in.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Letitia, student doctor, first year. Here's your picture. How are you? Okay. So just burning and itching. Have you had sex?
Across the country, scenes like this play out all of the time. Up to 88% of trafficking victims saw a medical professional while they were being exploited. But doctors are missing the signs.
So, anything else you want to talk about, or?
What? She's stuck.
For the record, this is not a real patient. This is an actor playing a victim of human trafficking. It's part of a training for medical students at the University of Louisville. Dr. Olivia Middles started these trainings after an experience where she believes she missed the signs of sex trafficking.
I discharged her home, but it was mostly because she was that distant type patient that didn't really want to communicate with me, didn't want to ask questions, didn't want me to really talk to her at all. And so I thought of her more as just a bad kid, and for lack of a better word, you know, I just thought that she wasn't going to listen to me. I don't know what she's been through. I don't know the type of life that she has, and so for that reason, she's not going to listen to me. And so that was my take on it, wrongly so.
Trainings like Dr. Middles are happening across the country. They're being led by doctors who believe in combating human trafficking from a public health perspective. Dr. Hani Stiklosa is the executive director of a network of healthcare providers who are focused on combating trafficking.
What we're saying is we need to change societal norms so that we're preventing trafficking. We're saying that we need to strengthen families so that children from broken homes don't end up being exploited by traffickers. When we're training healthcare providers about trafficking, it's not just about, hey, trafficking's happening, hey, these are the vulnerable populations, but it's about opening their hearts and minds to question their own unconscious biases with patients. But then there are definitely particular populations where I know that they're more likely to be trafficked, and I will take a closer look and ask more questions for those patients. So, for example, patients that are using substances like heroin, like meth. These are patients that are at super risk for being trafficked. We see that traffickers will actually go to methadone or Suboxone clinics and recruit directly from detox centers.
Addiction to heroin and other drugs often comes into play for victims of sex trafficking. In Boston, an organization called My Life, My Choice provides mentors like Ann Wilkinson to help exploited youth transition from victim to survivor.
Drugs played a major part in my exploitation, as I think it does with girls. I had to use drugs to medicate and sedate myself for what was going on. I have never, the entire time that I was I was high. I was never not high when I was when I had to turn a date. I see a lot more youth being exploited, and I see them sort of thinking or kind of perceiving it as exploiting themselves, but having to work to feed their addiction. You know what I mean? To supply drugs for themselves or even for their pimp.
What are some of the situations that you've seen?
I've seen girls, I have one girl in particular who is still struggling with heroin addiction, and she was introduced to heroin by her pimp. And he would, you know, shoot her up and keep her kind of in a daze so that she could work. And now she has a full-blown heroin addiction and struggling to get clean. I think that a lot of girls, the substance abuse goes hand in hand because of the trauma that you experience. You know, I've had a gun to my head. I've been beaten by John or robbed or all of that. And so that's what you encounter. It's not just your pimp. You know, you don't know what you're going to get on the other side of that door when you go in that room. You know, I got clean at 30. I'm an adult. And so it was a little bit different for me because I was a little more mature. And so I have to always remember that these are children. So if you're 15 years old and you've got a heroin addiction, that's heavy.
I wanted to find out if this overlap between opioids and trafficking is happening in other places struggling with the heroin crisis. So I went somewhere that's been hit especially hard, Covington, Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati. Overdose deaths are now the #1 killer of Americans under the age of 50, and it's only gotten worse in recent years.
All right, we got a chance of an overdose.
So we are headed to a scene of an overdose. There's been several today, and it's past 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning, so these are happening in broad daylight. So they just told us that there were 5 overdoses in 25 minutes just in this area, in this part of town. But it's hard to actually find numbers on how the opioid crisis is intersecting with human trafficking. We called officials in the top 15 states for overdoses in the country. We were looking for reports on human trafficking that also looked at whether or not drugs were involved. What we found was an inconsistent patchwork of reports on the subject, but most of the states did acknowledge a connection. Kentucky is one of the states that actually does keep track of this, and we got a look at its numbers. So in 2016, reports show 1/3 of child human trafficking cases involved drugs in some way. And we wanted to find out more of how this was happening, so we filed a records request with Kentucky's Cabinet for Health and Human Services. Of the 80 alleged victims in which drugs were provided or involved in the trafficking, the age range was between 2 and 17 years old. We spoke to sources in Kentucky who said that in the especially young cases of trafficking, parents who have a drug habit are feeding that habit by selling time with their kids to pedophile drug dealers, basically.
She traded her 11-year-old daughter to her drug dealer for sex.
Rape, human trafficking, corruption of a minor, 10 guilty pleas in all. Prosecutors say heroin addiction was the driving force.
I mean, I know there's a heroin epidemic and that being addicted to such a strong drug really is a disease because it makes you do things that are usually unfathomable to you. But to get to the point of desperation where you see dollar signs on your kid's forehead is something that I can't really wrap my mind around.
And if other states aren't even keeping records like this, they might have a big problem they don't even know about.
So we're up bright and early, and we're on our way to a human trafficking training that the Attorney General of Kentucky will be at. He's been doing a lot of work on this issue, and we're hoping we get to talk to him. I think a lot of the people here are actually undercover officers, so we can't show their faces.
Attorney generals are their state's chief law enforcement officer, so they have a big role to play when it comes to sex trafficking, including leading trainings like this one, which was partly funded by a grant from the Department of Justice.
Good morning. We look forward to this training on the next 3 days, but what we really look forward to is watching and helping with the work you're going to do in your communities moving forward. There's a lot of people out there who need our help. Thank God you're here to provide them that. Thank you all very much.
Hi, Mr. Bashir.
Andy Bashir.
I'm Noor. Are trafficking and drugs connected?
Absolutely. Sadly, right now, just about every crime and drugs are connected. And Kentucky has one of the worst drug epidemics in the country. We were the birthplace of the pill mills that pushed out opioids by the hundreds of thousands and millions. There was a time in Kentucky where there were more than 10 prescriptions for every person. The connection in Kentucky is absolutely real, and we see tragic situations. We see mothers who get their daughters addicted to heroin so that they can traffic them. We've seen a number of those cases. We see foster parents using drugs as a way to create dependence. So definitely one part of addressing human trafficking is addressing that drug epidemic.
Attorney General Bashir told me about a local survivor and activist who runs a safe house for people trying to get out of the life of sex trafficking.
Just wonderful. Well, of course, this is a safe place for victims of human trafficking. We show a lot of compassion, a lot of love, and of course, I am a survivor, so that make it extra.
Are all the girls who come through here out of the life, or some of them still in transition?
All of them. Most of the girls come straight off the streets. Even if she gets free, we still have to deal with that chemical dependency, because she could be free, but if she's still suffering from addiction, all it's going to do is push her back to the street. Just come here is a major accomplishment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we real define it. When we get free, we think everybody's just trying to attack us or hurt us in some kind of form. That, like, they really don't care. So I think, yeah, they really don't care about us. It's like, it's so real. Everybody just think this we just run around, just want our bodies to be sold. But they don't know the underground world. When everybody be asleep at night, what we go through from like 12 to midnight to 6 in the morning. That's when the real stuff be happening. You know, everybody be asleep. It's like The Walking Dead out there. It's like The Walking Dead.
What are things people should be looking for?
I think people need to be looking for, one of my biggest things that I had a problem with, when people went to work, they see me on that corner when they went to work, they see me on that corner when they got off of work, and they see me on that same corner for 3 or 4 days. Something is wrong. And nobody's never stopped and asked. So that it's very important that our lives matters too. And we're not bad people. We just got in a bad situation.